Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Entropy Podcast. I'm your host, Francis Gorman. Before we dive in, if today's conversation challenges you, sparks a new idea, or sharpens how you think about the world, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who enjoys staying curious. Today, I'm joined by Shelly Bernard, a cognitive analyst, human dynamics specialist, and narrative strategist. Shelly is also the host of the newly formed The Other Side podcast, where she is providing a platform to document conversations with those who have had elite government and military careers, creating a pathway for those individuals to share real stories, insights, and lessons that inspire others navigating transitions, life, or who are just simply curious to step inside the world of elite expertise. Shelly, it's lovely to have you here with me today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Shelly, your podcast is really interesting. I know you're only into a couple of episodes, but what made you come up with the idea of interviewing elite professionals in the government and military space to get their perspective on the world and the journey they've had today? Where did that idea come from?
Well, I originally developed my expertise in profiling. I started off with personality profiling, and then I gravitated more into integrating more cognitive science into my profiling sessions and coaching with those transitioning out of the elite government careers and military careers, but also those who were existing in, the private sector and had already transitioned out, but were having trouble, figuring out who they were, their identity, and where they belong in the world, and what careers would make them happy after, transitioning out of an elite environment where they were, surrounded by other high performers. That's a very, complex space to be. So I started off there, and so I just kept running from there afterwards. And I just was having so many conversations with men and women getting out and just being confused on what to do, who they were, and what their identity was. So the more that I got into it, it just dawned on me how important it is for those who are going through, transitions in life and their careers and a significant environment change, and just trying to look at what everyone else is doing to navigate their path. But sometimes in that process, to be able to get their needs met, they like to tell their stories as well. So I'm all about personal alignment and exposing conversations and experiences through storytelling in that process. So that's kind of what led to the podcast development. I just had so much access to all of these former elite service members who have, served in these extraordinary and high performing careers, but also exposed to high threat environments, and navigating that transition from exiting those environments and going into more of like a business environment is significantly challenging. So in the process of profiling and, understanding how their minds work, who they are from a biological aspect, not just what they've done in the past, but why they're good at what they're good at, and really focusing on performance was so life-changing in that process. But also I uncovered that there's a lot of value with these individuals and telling their stories so that others can navigate transitions as well. But I always emphasize, just because someone went down a specific path does not mean that that path is right for you as well. So I really wanted to share, a wide range of stories and experiences of what people went through to be able to help others navigate, life shifts and significant environment changes. So
It's really inspirational, Shelly. And I suppose you often hear when someone leaves an elitism, be it football, the military, whatever it's in, they lose part of their identity. How often do you see that materialize? That they're almost lost in a way, or they don't really know who they are anymore without the title or the uniform or the purpose that they had when they served in the military or when they performed in that elite unit within government?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I've even tied it back into childhood development and the environments that we, go through significant developmental shifts in our lives. I'm not going to go down that road because I could go there for hours, but It's just, I mean, honestly, I think that identity is something that the world really struggles with, and not just these elite communities. And me tapping into the elites is there's reasons why individuals are really good at surviving. And it doesn't always involve a traumatic childhood environment. Sometimes it involves like misalignment with the environment or them having to adapt to an environment for decades. And so that's what I was kind of uncovering with the warfighters specifically out of the special operations community, was that they were adopting an identity for so long and adapting to the environment because they were really good at that, right? And it's like when they're faced with that transition, it's really a culture shock too, as well. So I think identity in general across the globe is really important, because I see even, extremely educated individuals identifying with their educational background. But then that can also welcome an ego, right? Ego is the protector of the identity, as Tim Adams says. He's one of my recent podcast hosts. And, ego will prevent information from coming in and from being receptive to learning information. And so once you have that ego there and you are adopting an identity or a title, it can be really challenging to grow. And so I think that that's really important as well in terms of identity and finding yourself. So
That's really interesting about the ego aspect. So it's almost like an invisible wall to growth. I already know that. I don't need to listen. I'm right. That sort of a psyche can build into an individual. I don't think I've always heard of ego as dangerous, but I don't think I've ever heard of it explained or tied back in those mannerisms, which is really insightful. Also, Shelly, the childhood and the form, the kind of that idea that your childhood forms who you become. Can we actually talk about that for a minute? Because I'm a dad, I'm always worried I'm going to screw my kids up because of something I've done, So what makes someone want to run towards bullets and bombs? Is that what, have you found a connection or a synergy in childhoods to ending up in the military or in those kind of more, let's call them dangerous career choices?
I think that there's a combination. So I hate to say everyone, because that's, in specific groups of people, everyone is different, right? We all have different experiences, but we all have specific ways that our minds is wired. There's ways that when we're born, that our brain prioritizes certain information. Certain regions in the brain are biologically firing off more than other regions in the brain. So that's essentially what I associate to the biological identity. And environment, in terms of neuroscience, environment shapes how we respond to ourselves and our cognitive operating system, essentially. So if you're born into an environment, I'll give you an example. If you're born into an environment where you need to learn information through discussing things in real time with other people and engaging with others, or, experimentation, tinkering with things and figuring out how things work in the environment, but your environment doesn't allow you to discuss things in real time. Maybe you're in a classroom when you're a kid, and if you're asking too many questions, the teacher gets upset or kids start making fun of you, in social settings, then you're going to shape and mold into what is expected of the environment. And over time, that starts to develop baselines in how your brain associates with behavior and impulsivity through neurochemical balance. So to answer your question in a long, drawn-out way, those that I've seen in elite warfighting careers have a very specific cognitive ability to be able to hear a pin drop in a room and rapidly respond to that. And the way that they learn information is associated to those types of abilities. That also is very dominant in professional athletes. So being able to maneuver your body and respond rapidly and take in data at a rapid rate and then respond to it is something that ties directly into physical capabilities as well. So it's very interesting. I've been doing a lot of cross analysis between different demographics and elite communities lately and finding a lot of similarities, but also differences as well. So it's very interesting.
When I think about this, there's one thing I always think it's really valuable. You know, a lot of people I know in cybersecurity have come from intelligence or military backgrounds. Is there anything that surprised you about how high performers think under pressure? You talked about the chemical reaction and hearing a pin drop and that ability to kind of mobilize yourself in an instant. Is there other patterns that are identifiable from those individuals or any unique kind of tells?
There's actually, it's very interesting that you mention, intelligence and cybersecurity. People who are very technologically savvy have different skills than someone who's going to be able to run into a room and respond rapidly to the environment, right? Just like intelligence professionals are very good at responding to real time data and picking up on things and patterns in real time that they can respond, but also associated to emotional intelligence as well. So I've tapped into in the intelligence community why they're good at what they're good at, why Delta or SEAL Team 6 operators are good at what they're good at, but also why engineers are good at what they're good at, why cybersecurity hackers are good at what they're good at, and everything is associated to how this works, but also what information you're taking in to decide or make a decision. If you're able to pick up on patterns, or maybe you're more dominant in picking up on, sensory information, it all matters and it all aligns with the underlying reasons of why we as human beings are naturally good at what we're good at. So it's very interesting.
It's super interesting. I could talk about this stuff all day. I don't think an hour window in a podcast is almost enough. We might have to have an offline and get down into the real weeds and some of this, Shelly. There's one thing you said there, emotional intelligence. I've had an awful lot of people from the intelligence community on the show since it started, and one thing I always find is emotional intelligence is an area they're very high in. Is there a reason for that? Do you see that across military as well as the intelligence community?
It's interesting because the military and the national security and defense space, it's interesting because thank you for asking this question because I love talking about this. I have a special place in my heart for the intelligence community because I sustained and survived in a community in, the more defense and military kind of demographics where they don't prioritize emotional intelligence. They don't like emotion at all because that's integrated into survival, right? And then coping with the ability to keep going and not let emotion control them, right? That's a very known thing in military demographics and for survival. And the intelligence community, I get to talk about what I'm good at, and that's emotional intelligence and being able to pick up on information and data on people and understanding people using emotion and connection. And the intelligence community is very skilled at that at the highest levels. And those individuals really, it's extraordinary because they also have certain profiles that I've seen that are dominant in the intelligence community in terms of like human intelligence collection, where they can be able to adapt or understand people from an educated perspective, but they also allow themselves to emotionally connect in an authentic way with others. And not everybody has that capability and that skill. And I've actually had conversations with specific operations officers that told me about, back in the day, they started recruiting, what was it? At Yale, they had posters where it was like, we're looking for PhD students that can win a bar fight. And I'm like, that's so interesting because intellectually advanced people typically veer towards, more data or systematic kind of skills in identifying patterns. But to be able to also identify patterns in using emotional intelligence is so incredibly useful. And I call those the unicorns of the world, essentially. But in this Yale poster, I thought about compared to how then they would recruit those guys and girls, just high intellect, but also the ability to like physically respond, but how society and the modern day and technological advancements and warfighting is shifting dramatically. And that area is often overlooked, and that's a huge gap in warfighting applications. So I love the intelligence community because they figured out, they're like, hey, emotion is not a vulnerability. It's a tool, it's a skill. But I think that cybersecurity is having a lot of problems because, again, we're naturally good at specific things, right? And emotional intelligence is a tricky area. Again, it's a unicorn to try to find someone who has all of it. But there's certain priorities in our brain where we prioritize either human focused decision making or more logical decision making focused on, finding the evidence and the proof behind something, or looking at the data is really dominant in the cybersecurity world right now. But understanding emotion is not. So, yeah.
So we need more emotional cybersecurity people, is what I'm hearing.
Yes, we need to be more receptive to emotion. It isn't, because there's also this, I don't know about, overseas and in other countries and other cultures, but in the US culture, it's like, in the government space, in the warfighting space and counterintelligence, it's like everyone has been understanding that emotion can impair logical decision making, right? And I feel like it had this bias of emotion is not useful. Emotion can hinder performance. But now I think it's starting to surface. People are seeing the importance of it because it is being utilized by threat actors and stuff and especially in cybersecurity. So it's a very interesting time right now where I feel like the globe is naturally being forced to combine different minds and different skills in that way. So it's very interesting.
That's incredible. And like, I can see it. I know lots of cybersecurity people who are really passionate and can get very emotional when they hear the wrong thing, but not use that emotion in a logical sense. It kind of blurs them. It's like, you can't possibly do that. And you kind of have to go, well, it's a business decision. Yeah, but it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But you're so key. Like if we could bring that training into part of the role to kind of go, don't react. Like what's Warren Buffett's saying, if you let people control your emotions, they'll always have power over you, or something around that. It's very true. Like if you can't see through the emotion with logic, you're kind of going up the hill the wrong way.
Yeah. And I just, when you were talking about that too, I just realized, ego is an emotional response, like we were talking about earlier, and it's interesting because even people who prioritize making, logical decisions in terms of, what makes sense, right? What's going to work. And then considering human aspects of that afterwards, those individuals still respond with emotion. It's just in a different form, right? It's in defense, and our brain is unconsciously and subconsciously doing things at all times. And we do have unconscious and subconscious biases. And if we don't understand how our brain is wired, and how we make decisions, what information we need to make decisions and what we prioritize, but also what types of decisions we're making, then we don't really understand our true biases. And so with me calculating again that calculation of how you're making decisions, that sheds light on bias and being able to identify, okay, I prioritize humans, but I also consider logic and what will logically make sense and realistically work. But I do prioritize more human focused decisions. So maybe I need to work with someone else and get their take on something, their opinion on a decision from a lot more logical perspective, because that person is better at that than I am. And so I think that in terms of diversity and coming together, in my master's final thesis for my psychology master's degree was on cognitive team blending and how to develop high performing teams based off of how we're cognitively wired and how we make decisions and what we're good at from a scientific aspect. and coming together with others that think differently and being able to do that in an environment where everyone's trained, hey, this is your skill. This is why you're good at what you're good at. But, John over here is good at this. So if we need to make a decision that's more in his lane, we're going to reach out to him. And I think, just having cohesion within team environments and understanding that people are good at things that we are not good at is so useful. But there's a lot of conflict in terms of human dynamics and how we are wired, why we don't get along with certain people. And so I'm the basis of why I've been successful and really mastered the art of calculating this in others is because I think in a very different way than the environment that I was in trying to survive in for a long time, and trying to figure out, hey, these guys are different from me. They think differently from me. I want to listen to them. I don't want to try to control them or change them or change their perspective. I want to listen to understand who they are so that I can help them. And I think that that's very, very powerful in that aspect, because I was blending into more, of an industry that shuts down emotion to understand them. But in turn, I collected a lot more, advanced intellectual capabilities to perceive the opposite type of person that I was interacting with. And it's just very fascinating, especially in terms of conflict and all this conflict the world is in right now. People just think differently and we communicate differently. And it's very interesting. So
That's something that actually. So we live in a chaotic world. What impact is that having on our cognitive ability to process what's going on? Are people just blocking out the reality right now, or have people come numb to the violence? And the world seems to be a little bit upside down at the minute. And from a psychological perspective, is that having an impact on how teams are operating, or how people are starting to process information differently? Is there something we need to be doing within our organizations to acknowledge some of these things a bit better?
Again, the basis of everything is humans and our identity and how we interact with our environment. And if the environment is not aligned with what our brain needs and how we need to feel aligned with ourselves, and we keep trying to, if this is an expression, pound a square peg into a round hole, and force it over time, things just get really shaky. And like you mentioned earlier, like you're trying not to mess up your son. And I think as parents, we all try to, we all worry about that. That's a normal, natural thing, especially with, research surfacing on, physiological aspects of suppression and all that kind of stuff. In terms of the environment that we grow up in, we expose ourselves to, is so incredibly important to how we show up with ourselves. And if you go through decades of suppressing yourself to fit into an environment or a society that's not allowing you to be yourself, or a job or a career, then over time, things get complicated, especially up here. And that's the basis of my work, is understanding suppression, measuring, being able to measure beyond suppression, because that's also something that tweaks the calculation. Is like, I'm obsessed with seeing the truth and the reality of what is going on, because it's so important to understand and have people aligned with themselves so that they can grow and they can get along with other people. But if you're trying to force yourself to do something, or you're not getting your needs met, then it's going to start coming out in certain environments, and that's survival, right? And we're all just trying to survive at this point. And so I think with all of the conflict globally right now, I mean, there's also bad people out there that are understanding how our minds work beyond maybe how we even realize how important this is, especially in warfare. And they are directly targeting the vulnerabilities in that, and shaking up societies and being able to deploy messaging in to make people emotionally respond, And so I feel like it's a war on minds and good versus evil right now. So yeah, it's just,
Let's talk about the cognitive warfare piece, Shelly, because I think it's important, and I've covered it quite a lot, the disinformation and misinformation, and you can divide from within without ever having to fire a shot, and it's a powerful tool. Russia uses it quite a bit. China is known to do it. We've seen manipulation across the British electoral system. It's been in the US as well. How significant is that in reality? Like, is it something that needs to be surfaced a lot more?
Yes. And the basis of identity. So I went down the cognitive warfare rabbit hole shortly after I finished my master's final thesis, because I was researching a lot of cognition and trying to back everything that I was, I see patterns and then I have to find the evidence to the pattern, because that's important, right? And because if you don't, it's just essentially a theory. So in that sense, when I was in my studies, I was picking up on a lot of research out of certain countries. And I was like, why is the US not really, getting up to pace with all of this? And then I was like, interesting. Well, those countries don't really prioritize people and well-being. So they also are enemies of us. And they have higher ability to survey individuals and human behavior. So they have mass surveillance where they can watch how humans behave. They have real natural environmental research capabilities. And in the US, and I don't know in other countries what the laws are there, but there's a lot of protect humans in research because people have done bad stuff before. But that's actually a significant limitation for us, because we can't study human beings and natural environments. That's superficial data. And I'm sorry. I can have side quests all day and find connections and other things. And it can be a lot for some people. But if you think about data and open source information, it's like we're looking at the behavior, and behavior is easy to alter these days. And that's what the enemies are doing, is they can deploy things to alter behavior so that they can't be profiled. But what are we doing? Are we up to speed on that? So there's so many areas where it's like we're trying to protect humans, but also it's coming back to be a vulnerability to us as well, especially in research, and being able to fight cognitive warfare capabilities the right way, if that makes sense.
It makes lots of sense, Shelly. And no, look, this stuff is just, it's like a good coffee, It kind of, you take a sip and it kind of ruminates around your body and makes you feel warm, and it sparks different things, and you start thinking around different kind of avenues to go through. And it's a weird analogy. I get my analogies a bit weird, but it's just, the mind is such a powerful tool, and if it's been used to manipulate us, but it also can be used to lift us up. When people come out of these careers, do you ever find that the mind is broken and needs to be put back together? You often hear that, someone who's kicked doors for 20 years and then comes out, their nerves are shot. They can't integrate back into society. How big of an issue is that?
So in terms of, yes, the demographic that I started in, it was an extremely complex demographic. They have cognitive biases to not wanting to be known. They don't, a lot of times they don't, in most severe cases, a lot of people don't want to face the reality of themselves or, their past and what experiences they've had, because that's opening a door that they may not be ready to open, right? And so I think it's very important in terms of performance coaching, and clinical psychologists know this as well, is that there's a lot of risk involved with, opening a wound on someone when they're not ready to deal with that, and that goes into ethical guidelines as well, especially in the psychology field. So with that being said, I've had a lot of my candidates and clients, process things that maybe they weren't in an environment where they could process it, right? And maybe it's time once they go through that environment shift to start facing those things. And that's not my job. I refer them out to, a psychologist or psychiatrist, or, there's now psychedelic treatments and certain foundations and things like that and that community that really can handle that kind of stuff in the depths. But in terms of me and my approach, I just want to help people see why they are good at what they're good at in a positive light. Like, hey, yes, you think you can do everything, but what's going to make you happy, right? And what's going to make you aligned with yourself to be able to move forward and go into an environment that maybe is not aligned with you so much, but here's how you can supplement certain things outside of that to get your needs met. And so it's really fascinating in terms of profiling as well. I can pick up on what types of, online threat actors, sorry, we're segueing in back into cybersecurity here, but online threat actors, like if you are not getting your needs met and you need to go, you're in an environment like at home where your kids are a priority, you can't get your needs met and you need to go, talk about things or express the logical side of things, then you're going to go on X and sometimes it gets impulsive and that's where your needs are not being met. It can come out through online behavior as well. So it's very important going back into my clients. What I've done with them is, hey, this is how you need to get your needs met. So your impulsivity or your needs don't start coming out in business or, other environments it's not appropriate. So I think that's very important as well.
Absolutely is. Shelly, for leaders who listen to this show and they want to know how do they structure a team that is elite and on the edge and stays sharp, is there certain techniques they should be thinking about? Because we've talked a lot about the cognitive behaviors that are kind of leading to certain individuals being a certain way and how they've been shaped over potentially a lifetime. Can elitism be taught, or are you just born with it?
That is a loaded question there. Because again, going back to, the intelligence community being really good at what they do because they're in an environment that is helping them grow in areas that they may not be very skilled in, but they're still developing those skills, but they're also channeling their primary skills, right? And we naturally gravitate towards careers that are meeting our needs because we're good at something, right? So in the warfighter application, it's like they're very good at physiologically fighting and adapting and using a tool as almost an extension of their own body or something like that. And so they're in those environments where they can hone into those skills. But it's almost like athletes as well. And I was talking about this last week. A lot of athletes, elite athletes, went through significant childhood trauma or were in, low socioeconomic status environments where all they could do to get their needs met was go out to a basketball court and practice and try to improve on those areas. So we naturally gravitate towards what we are good at. But if the environment doesn't allow us to grow in what we're good at, then that's where there's a lot of problems with, mental health disorders and things like that too. So I think it can be learned as long as you're in the environment where it's conditioning you to become better and reach that elite level. But for someone like me, I'm not going to be as skilled physiologically as, a warfighter. So I can go and try to pound a square peg into a round hole all day. But the reason why I'm not going to excel in those areas is because this is not wired in a way where I can learn that information and maneuver myself. And also there's, physical differences between females and males as well. But it's all around the brain and how you're cognitively wired and what you're going to be good at.
That made absolute sense, Shelly. And you know what? I do have to kind of listen back to these episodes sometimes and distill them down and break out all of the key points. There's one thing I want to ask you before we finish up. Is there one question you wish people would actually ask you about your work and what you do?
That's a very interesting question. Not really. I just think that maybe what I prioritize when I hear information or what I'm making a decision on, I'm always questioning why something is. And I think with the complexity in the world and the information domain and the environments right now, and, you know, there being so much fake information in there, I'm always constantly asking why to get to the foundational issue of things, to not just provide superficial solutions. And so I don't know, that was kind of like a weird segue into the question, but I think that what's really important and what the world needs right now to be able to filter through all of this information complexity is always questioning why something is happening and not settling for what is, if that makes sense.
It does. And I think it's a lovely way to end the show that, let's ask why and, think a little bit more about the world around us and just be nice. It's a complex world we're living in. Shelly, it was absolutely lovely to have you on. I think that was a really valuable session. And I think there was lots of insights there that I'm going to have to break down and think about a little bit more this evening. But real pleasure speaking to you, and stay safe.
Thanks. You as well. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure.